Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. The war in Ukraine is taking a dangerous turn. Yesterday, Russian forces fired rockets from inside a nuclear plant. In the last 24 hours, the situation has worsened. The nuclear plant was hit by shelling at least 10 times. There is now a serious risk of a nuclear catastrophe. And this is not an exaggeration. The threat is so grave that it has brought even the US and China together. The two arch rivals are on the same page for a change. They want the United Nations experts to visit this plant, this nuclear power plant in Ukraine, and assess the damage. India too has expressed concern. New Delhi wants all parties to exercise restraint, but Russia and Ukraine are in no mood to listen to anyone. They're locked in an ugly blame game. While missiles and bombs fly in and out of this nuclear plant, can the world avoid a nuclear disaster from happening? This is our cover story tonight. What you just saw is the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine. It is doubling up as a Russian military base now. It is packed with soldiers and weapons. They're launching rockets from inside, and the whole world is worried about the consequences, including India. We told you about the dangerous escalation yesterday, the threat of a nuclear disaster in Ukraine. This nuclear plant was hit by shelling not once or twice, but at least 10 times. I'll repeat that for you. A nuclear plant was shelled 10 times. And you don't need me to tell you how dangerous that is. It's a critical juncture in this war. A nuclear power plant is being used as leverage. Russia and Ukraine are striking, and the world is unable to stop them, it seems. The Zaporizhzhia plant has been in Russia's control since the month of March. In recent weeks, it has become a battlefield. Fighting around the camp has increased and intensified. There are 6 reactors at this facility. The Russians control all of them, but the staff is Ukrainian. They were there before the invasion, and when the Russian soldiers took control, they kept the Ukrainian staff. And from here, they began attacking Ukrainian soldiers from the nuclear facility. The Russians are not stepping out to fight. They're launching attacks from inside the nuclear plant. There are about 500 Russian soldiers inside the facility. We have satellite images from last month. You can see a dozen military vehicles parked near buildings. Just look how close they were to the first and the second reactor. There were also some tents nearby, presumably being used by Russian troops. Reports say a Ukrainian staff member was also beaten to death. A few weeks ago, the Ukrainians began firing back. They conducted a drone strike on the nuclear plant. Would you believe it? A drone strike on a nuclear power plant, and then they released the video. This is a kamikaze drone firing at Russian soldiers inside the nuclear facility. Remember those military tents near the reactor? The Ukrainian soldiers destroyed them. 3 people were killed, 12 were injured. They're believed to be Russians. And since then, both sides have been firing at each other. Here's an assessment on the latest strikes. This is from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA. It is a global nuclear watchdog. And it says the plant's power supply was hit. And this is very, very serious, because uninterrupted power is critical for any nuclear plant. Reactors need constant circulation of water to cool their core, and for that, you have to operate water pumps. And these pumps run on electricity, which is why you need a steady supply of water. and this supply line was damaged in a strike. It's not clear who was behind it or whether it's been fixed, but there's more bad news. There is a nuclear storage facility at the plant. A rocket blew up close to it. No side is claiming responsibility, and none is showing responsibility. They keep pushing their luck, it seems. This week, Russia fired rockets from the facility. They hit residential areas. 14 civilians died. Then there was shelling yesterday. The IAEA has pressed the panic button.
It's a serious hour, great hour, and the IAEA must be allowed to conduct its mission to Zaporizhzhia as soon as possible. The IAEA has been ready to perform such a mission since June, when we were ready to go. But unfortunately, due to political factors and other considerations, it was not possible.
This is a grave hour, he says. But his appeal fell on deaf ears. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia is indulging in nuclear blackmail.
Russia can provoke the largest radiation emergency in history at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear station, and the factual aftermath can be more catastrophic than Chernobyl.
More catastrophic than Chernobyl, he says, but that's not stopping Ukrainian forces from firing. The United Nations Security Council met on Thursday to discuss this. The Russian ambassador said Ukraine was conducting quote-unquote criminal acts on nuclear infrastructure. And as this blame game continues, India too has expressed concern.
India expresses its concern over the reports of shelling near the spent fuel storage facility of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. All mutual restraint so as not to endanger the safety and security of nuclear facilities. Mr. President, India continues to remain concerned over the situation in Ukraine. Since the beginning of the conflict, India has consistently called for an immediate cessation of hostilities and an end to violence. We've called upon both sides to return to the path of diplomacy and dialogue. We support all diplomatic efforts to end the conflict.
The United Nations is trying to break the impasse. They have proposed a demilitarized zone around the plant.
He urges the withdrawal of any military personnel and equipment from the plant and the avoidance of any further deployment of forces or equipment to the site. The facility must not be used as part of any military operation, he said. Instead, urgent agreement is needed at the technical level on a safe perimeter of demilitarization to ensure the safety of the area.
It's a good idea, but it won't work until all stakeholders are on board, and that's not happening in a hurry. In the meantime, winter is coming for Britain, and much like in the Game of Thrones, the leaders are not prepared. There is a lame duck Prime Minister in Downing Street. Energy bills are rising, and the forecast says more heat waves are coming. It is an unprecedented crisis for Britain. Let me explain in numbers. By 2023, Britain's energy bills are expected to top $5,000. What about average income? According to the Bank of England, $2,500. That's what the average British worker will earn per month. Do you see the problem here? The energy bill is twice the monthly income. Your 2-month salary equals to 1 month's energy bill. The math simply does not work. And to resolve this crisis, Prime Minister Boris Johnson invited top energy bosses to Downing Street. They were asked to produce important data like expected profits, payouts, investment plans. Finance Minister Nadhim Zahawi had an ultimatum for energy executives. Either invest your bumper profits or get ready for more taxes. What did they choose? Well, neither. The Downing Street meeting ended in complete failure. A big reason for that was Boris Johnson himself. This caretaker Prime Minister has simply given up. He says any significant decision will be taken by the next Prime Minister. Now, his sentiment is understandable. Outgoing leaders often stay away from big moves, big decisions. But does this crisis count? Lowering energy costs for millions of Britons is not a political move. It is a job of the Prime Minister. And last we checked, Boris Johnson still holds that job. But how did things get so bad in the UK? After all, they're not dependent on Russian energy, not as much as Europe. First, let me show you the breakup. Britain produces 40% of its gas domestically, mostly near the Irish Sea. Another 40% is imported from Europe. The biggest source is a pipeline across the North Sea from Norway. That leaves around 20%, and this 20% is imported in the form of liquefied natural gas, LNG, mostly from Qatar and the US. And the big takeaway from this data is this. Britain does not import a lot of gas from Russia, about 4%, that's all. So until now, Britain was insulated from this energy crisis that the rest of Europe is facing. But with winter coming, that could change. Around 77% of their gas imports come from Norway. The question is, will that gas flow continue? Europe itself is facing an energy crisis. They're struggling to fill their reserves ahead of winter. So chances are exports will slow down. European gas will stay inside Europe, and if that happens, all bets are off. Britain's energy bills could reach unprecedented levels. I have more numbers. In the 2019 winter, British gas bills were around £1,200. In the 2020 winter, they came down just about £1,100. Last winter, energy bills were around £1,300. And this year, the projection is £4,200, £4,200. Like I said, unprecedented. And to make matters worse, there is no plan of action. Boris Johnson is passing the buck to his successor, which brings us to the two prime ministerial contenders, Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. What are their plans to tackle the crisis? Liz Truss is sticking to the hardcore conservative position. She has defended big oil's bumper earnings. She says profits are not dirty or evil. Well, normally they're not. But when energy bills become twice your salary, you have to wonder. Truss opposes any plan to raise taxes for corporations.
Those tax changes will cost £30 billion. That is affordable within our current budget. We'll still be able to pay debt down after 3 years. But I'm afraid to say the plans of raising taxes are likely to lead to a recession, and with a recession it'll be harder to pay the debt down.
What about Rishi Sunak? He's promising more assistance to British households. How? In the form of cuts in value-added tax. Sunak believes this will save $24 per household, in fact $244 per household, or £200.
If you support a plan that Liz is suggesting, which says she doesn't believe in doing that, doesn't believe in providing direct financial support to those groups of people, and that's what she said, because she thinks her tax cut is going to help them, which it is not, we are going to, as a Conservative government, leave millions of incredibly vulnerable people at the risk of real destitution. Now, I think that is a moral failure.
As Finance Minister, Sunak imposed a windfall tax on big oil. So clearly this race for numbers, and the race for number 10, in fact, is all about energy. Which leader is better prepared for the winter? But what about the outside factors? What if the gas from Europe dries up? In that case, officials are talking about a crisis situation. How would that play out? First, the government will override commercial gas deals. Then supplies to gas stations will be shut down, which means no power for homes and businesses. How long would this power rationing last? Almost 4 days, reports say. And this is the worst case scenario. But if it does happen, it could paralyze the British economy. Trains would stop running, heaters would stop working, factories would stop working, and all of this in peak winter season. Britain's GDP has already fallen 0.1% in the second quarter of 2022. The energy crisis could trigger a full-blown recession. So Britain's fate now lies with Europe. If European gas exports continue, the country will be safe. If not, this winter will be remembered for a long time. And now let me ask you a question. How far would you go for your money? Your monthly salary, a loan that you gave someone, or your hard-earned savings in the bank? To what extremes would you go to secure this money? Why am I asking these questions? Because a Lebanese man may have set a dangerous precedent. His name is Bassam al-Sheikh Hussein, 42 years old, a food delivery driver, struggling to make ends meet. He had to pay his father's medical bills. He sold his house, then his parents' house, and deposited all the money in a bank, the Federal Bank of Lebanon. It's one of the biggest private banks in the country. But Lebanon is in fact suffering from an economic crisis. So this bank, the Federal Bank of Lebanon, has restricted withdrawals. meaning if you have money in this bank, you can only withdraw small amounts. On Thursday, Hussein went to the bank, a Beirut branch. He wanted to withdraw over $1,000. The bank refused. The man insisted. The bank did not budge. You know what happened next? He went back, got a shotgun, held the bank hostage, threatened to kill customers, set himself on fire inside the bank. That's what he threatened. Images show him dressed in a T-shirt and shorts, walking in the premises as the staff tries to reason with him. Watch this.
بدك تروح تجيب المصاري ما في حدا غير من هيدا الفرقه ليجيب المصاري.
The hostage crisis went on for hours. As the news spread, hundreds of people gathered outside. There were also policemen, soldiers, intel officials, first aid providers. And what happened next was even more surprising. The people gathered outside began cheering for the hostage taker. They began praising him for doing what they could not. Listen to this.
He's forced to do that. He is not being a hero. Over the past 3 years, he's been trying to feed his children, and eventually he wanted to pay for the treatment of his father, who is in the hospital. What should he have done? Go steal when he has all his life savings of $210,000 in a bank that has locked away his money? He will do this, and he will do more than this.
Also present in the crowd was the man's family. They hailed him as a hero. They called his intentions noble.
10 days ago, I paid over $5,000 at the hospital for my father's treatment. The bills are all there, all stamped and confirmed. My brother is not a scoundrel. He couldn't be. He doesn't even smoke marijuana. Go ask around about him. He's the kindest person in the neighborhood. He takes what he has from his own pocket and gives it to others.
By evening, Hussein's efforts worked. The bank agreed to give him $30,000. In return, he allowed the hostages to be fed by a local restaurant. And shortly afterwards, he surrendered to the police. None of the hostages was harmed. No money was stolen. As Hussein stepped out, he lifted his hand in salute, as if to acknowledge the support he received. Needless to say, he'll end up in court now.
What happened is that one of the depositors came to the bank and held hostage all the employees and some bank clients. What I can say is that all the files are at the hands of judiciary.
As bizarre and dramatic as the story is, it's not a first. This is the second such case in Lebanon this year. In the month of January, another angry depositor tried something similar. He doused customers with fuel, demanding his life savings. And he got what he wanted. He too was hailed as a hero. And this shows how broken things are in the Lebanese economy. The downfall began in 2019. Lebanon defaulted on foreign debt. The Lebanese pound crashed. Bank withdrawals were restricted. People were pushed into poverty. Then came the pandemic. It aggravated the crisis. Annual inflation soared to record highs. Foreign reserves fell to record lows. The government started running out of money to import essentials. Tourism was the mainstay of the Lebanese economy. It accounted for 7% of the GDP. Wuhan virus lockdown destroyed tourism. The 2020 Beirut blasts made things even worse. You may remember these images. On the 4th of August 2020, a large amount of ammonium nitrate exploded at the port of Beirut. More than 200 people died. An estimated 300,000 became homeless. The damages were worth $15 billion. The blast destroyed Beirut's food silos. Today, Lebanon's economy looks beyond repair. The currency has collapsed. $1 is now equal to 1,500 Lebanese pounds. Government debt stands at 165% of the country's GDP. Only $11 billion are left in foreign reserves, and with banks paralyzed, people have been locked out of their accounts. All of this has pushed people like Hussein to desperation. They're on the brink. He'll have to face the court for stealing his own money. And he has the sympathies of his fellow citizens. Some companies often become synonymous with one product. For example, Xerox. Most people don't take photocopies, they take Xerox copies. That's how big that one product is. But what happens when the top-selling product gets mired in controversies and lawsuits? Case in point, Johnson & Johnson. Their talcum powder was the toast of the world. Doctors recommended it, parents swore by it, and almost every child used it. You could find their bottles in most homes around the world. In fact, you never bought baby powder, you bought Johnson's baby powder. That's how things were. Well, that product, Johnson's baby powder, is being officially pulled from the market in 2023. Johnson & Johnson will not sell talc-based powder anymore. Instead, they will sell cornstarch-based powder. The question is why? Because the current product is linked to cancer. J&J is facing thousands of lawsuits from women across the world. Most of them make the same allegation that the powder has traces of asbestos. Now, asbestos is basically a mineral. It can be mined from the earth. Until the 1970s, it was used extensively in construction. It reacts well against heat and corrosion. The downside, though, is that it causes cancer. So asbestos was gradually phased out from the construction industry. But turns out, Johnson's baby powder had traces of it. Well, how did that happen? Time for Skincare 101. The whole idea of baby products is to keep the skin dry to prevent all sorts of rashes, and talcum powder gets the job done. It keeps our skin dry. The problem is the source. Just like asbestos, talc is also a mineral. The mines that produce talc also produce asbestos. So inevitably they get mixed. Now, over the years, many women have sued Johnson & Johnson over this issue. A lawsuit in 2018 was in fact the biggest. Johnson & Johnson was ordered to pay $4.7 billion to 22 women. $550 million in compensation, $4.1 billion in punitive damages. All 22 women said the baby powder gave them ovarian cancer. Pretty soon, more damning reports emerged. A 2018 investigation revealed that Johnson & Johnson knew about the problem. They knew what the problem was. They knew the powder had traces of asbestos. Not one or two bottles, almost 30 years worth of products. 30 years. From 1971 to 2000, Johnson & Johnson products routinely tested positive for asbestos. This is what internal documents revealed. But the company continues to deny them. By 2020, the bad press was becoming too much to handle. Johnson & Johnson pulled their talcum powder from the US and Canada. Guess what they blamed? Misinformation. But outside North America, the sales continued, and so did the lawsuits. Almost 38,000 cases are pending against this company. Fighting all of this requires a lot of money. To be precise, more than $3.5 billion. So the company decided it's better to pull the plug. Their new strategy is this. Let me quote from Johnson & Johnson's statement. As part of a worldwide portfolio assessment, we have made the commercial decision to transition to an all cornstarch-based baby powder portfolio. They're swapping talc with cornstarch. And scientifically, it makes sense. Cornstarch is already used by multiple cosmetic brands. They have properties similar to talc. But it does that give Johnson & Johnson a free pass? After all, where is the accountability? Despite 38,000 lawsuits, despite all the investigations and scientific evidence, Johnson & Johnson is yet to admit their mistake. They're more concerned about perceptions. In fact, WION got an email today from the company. Our website carried this report earlier today. By noon, we got a reaction from Johnson & Johnson. This is what they said. Johnson & Johnson has not stopped selling its baby talcum powder because it is cancer-causing. It is a commercial decision and part of a worldwide portfolio assessment which includes evolving customer trends and preferences. Evolving customer trends. Really. 38,000 lawsuits are not a customer trend. We call that a health hazard. And the email goes on, and I'm quoting, "Please note that decades of independent scientific analysis by medical experts around the world confirms that talc-based Johnson's baby powder is safe, does not contain asbestos, and does not cause cancer." So I guess the courts are wrong, the scientific tests are wrong, also the internal company documents are wrong. If Johnson & Johnson are so confident about their product, why pull it from the market at all? Why go from talcum to cornstarch? The fact is, the company does not have to convince us. They must convince their customers, millions of people who use their powder almost religiously. They deserve an explanation, not us. For the moment, we shift our attention to South Korea. Their economy is going through a rough patch. So what does the president do? He turns to the country's most successful family business, Samsung. Just one problem, though. Samsung's de facto chief, Lee Jae-yong, was imprisoned for bribery. So this week, he was granted a presidential pardon, a ticket out of prison. The release comes with the expectation that Lee will push Samsung into an overdrive and in the process rescue South Korea's economy.
It was only the question of when, not if. Lee Jae-yong will get his presidential pardon next week. He was already out of prison. Lee was released on parole last year. It happened under the watch of the then President Moon Jae-in. Moon's successor, Yoon Suk-yeol, is pardoning nearly 1,700 people. Lee Jae-yong is one of them. The pardon also solves another problem for Lee. As a convicted criminal, he couldn't have returned to Samsung in a formal capacity. Now Lee gets a free hand to do business.
As major businessman, Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong will be given a special lottery. Lotte Group Chairman Shin Dong-bin will be given a special pardon and lottery.
He was accused of bribing Park Geun-hye, a former president. The revelation had serious consequences. Park Geun-hye was impeached from her position. She was eventually put behind bars, and Lee followed him to jail. Park got out last year in December after a presidential pardon. Lee had to serve a 30-month-long sentence, but she was getting out after spending just 19 months in jail. That's because the South Korean government needs him. South Korea's economy is dominated by a handful of family-owned conglomerates. They are called chaebol. Samsung is the most successful of them all. The company's 15 biggest subsidiaries account for 20% of South Korea's GDP. Samsung's electronics unit is a force in exports. 16% of the goods exported from South Korea come from this unit alone. Seoul wants Samsung to maximize its output. South Korean economy is going through tough times. Over 40% of the country's GDP depends on exports. In recent months, business has been sluggish. The war in Ukraine, growing inflation, and slowing demand has reduced the global appetite for South Korean goods. South Korea now needs the chaebols to step up. The government is not shy of admitting it needs help. In a statement, Seoul said Lee's pardon is an attempt to overcome the economic crisis. Lee, too, had something to say. In his statement, he promised to do his best for his country. His pardon is not rare, neither is it unprecedented. South Korea has a long history of bailing out business leaders in trouble. Lee's late father, Lee Kun-hee, was pardoned too. He was given a presidential pardon twice. So the tycoons in South Korea have a habit of getting away. An opposition leader summed it up the best. He said in South Korea, you are free if you are rich, but guilty if poor. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now to China. After days of firing threats and missiles, China has escalated its economic war with the US. Major Chinese companies have decided to pull out of the US. 5 big businesses will delist from Wall Street. PetroChina, China Life Insurance Company, Sinopec Shanghai Petrochemical, Aluminium Corporation of China, and China Petroleum and Chemical Corporation. All of these companies are state-owned, meaning the Chinese state runs them. And they're massive. Taken together, these 5 companies are worth well over $300 billion. So if you're an investor, chances are you'll be motivated to buy their shares. Well, now you won't be able to because these 5 companies are leaving American stock exchanges. You may ask why, and I'll tell you it's the tussle between Beijing and Washington, D.C. The U.S. wanted to audit Chinese companies as per American rules. It wanted U.S. inspectors to check the financial audits of Chinese companies every 3 years, but China refused. And this, by the way, is not a new dispute. It began 2 decades ago, so no immediate trigger, at least on this count. In fact, reports say the two sides were trying to settle the differences. Then one day China decided to pull the plug. What happened? Did they run out of patience, or is this retaliation? Experts say China is hitting back at the US. This is about Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and China is striking at US markets. It's not surprising. They've been working on a decoupling plan for a while now. The US, remember, has intensified the scrutiny of Chinese businesses, just like India has. The US has also kicked out some Chinese companies. This was during the Trump presidency. China Mobile, China Telecom, and China Unicom left the New York Stock Exchange. They allegedly have business links with the Chinese military, so the US saw them as a security threat. They were asked to go. And since then, the US has put more Chinese companies under the scanner. We're talking about at least 300 businesses, 300 Chinese businesses. Their combined worth is over $2.4 trillion. On this list is Alibaba, the biggest Chinese name in e-commerce, also one of the biggest success stories from China. Alibaba listed in the US back in 2014. The company made history that day. It raised $25 billion from American markets. It was the biggest IPO in US history then. Jack Ma was in New York for the listing. He was greeted like a superstar, mobbed by reporters. Some traders even wore an orange hoodie to welcome him. Orange is, of course, the brand color of Alibaba. But that was then, 2014. Today's Alibaba is suffering a crackdown in China, and it is under investigation in the US. The Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, is America's stock market regulator. Last month, it added Alibaba to the list of companies that could be delisted. Now, this was a threat. Basically, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, is telling Alibaba, show us your books or leave America. And Alibaba seems to be preparing for the inevitable, the exit. They're seeking a listing in Hong Kong now, meaning Alibaba shares could be traded from Hong Kong. In fact, that's a route that a lot of Chinese companies could take. Effectively, that could mean coming home to China, decoupling of Chinese businesses from American markets. It was being predicted for a long time. Today, China made the first move. Our next story is from South Africa. It's been 3 decades since South Africa abolished apartheid, a system of racially segregating black people from white people. The country got rid of it in the 1990s, but the spirit of apartheid is still alive in some places. One of them is Orania, a remote town in the country's north, often called the last outpost of apartheid. Why? Because Orania is a whites-only town. Black people cannot live or work here. Every job is reserved for the whites. Every task performed by white people. And yet the residents of this town insist they're not racist. Here's a report.
Welcome to Orania, a remote farming town in South Africa's Northern Cape. It prints its own money, runs its own banks, has its own holidays and manages its own affairs. Sounds like the perfect township to relocate, right? Well, hold your horses. To enter Orania, you have to qualify on certain parameters. The foremost is the color of your skin. It has to be white, because Orania is a whites-only town. The uniqueness is too obvious to ignore. Wherever you go in this township, you will only find Afrikaners. White people with Dutch ancestry. They do all the work, from playing the piano at the church to reading out the Bible to believers, to running the kitchen at a restaurant. To even gardening at orchards. All jobs, big or small, are reserved for white people. But the residents of this town insist that they're not racist.
We are from Africa, that's why we call ourselves Afrikaners. We want to remain here. We also want to retain our identity. Now, to retain one's identity is not a racist impulse. We wanted to retain our identity against the English or the British imperialism also, and they're even whiter than we are, much whiter.
Orania is often dubbed as the last outpost of apartheid, a system of institutionalized racial segregation. South Africa abolished apartheid in the 1990s. But the legacy lives on in Orania. In fact, the township was founded by the son-in-law of Hendrik Verwoerd, South Africa's former prime minister, who's considered to be the architect of apartheid. Verwoerd's bust lies at the museum in this township, serving as a reminder of his beliefs. As for Nelson Mandela, the man credited with ending apartheid, the people of Orania don't really hold him in high regard.
I don't think that I can see him as a hero because he's part of a whole package. Mandela is part of a whole package. And as Mandela, all the other leaders within the ANC make a contribution to create some policy that is, from our viewpoint, not necessarily for the best of this country.
Mandela is not a hero, they say. And they're not racist, they insist. So what is this town all about? An attempt to protect their culture.
Yes.
This township is legal as per South Africa's constitution. An article defends its right to self-determination. But Orania's ambitions could soon spell trouble. Because the people here say their next goal is the creation of an Afrikaner republic, a white-only autonomous region within South Africa. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
How fast is climate change happening? Well, there's no exact answer to this question, but the overall consensus is it's happening too fast. A new report has only reinforced this belief. It focuses on the Arctic region. Let's begin with some basic facts. The Arctic is located around the northern pole of the Earth. Total area almost 14.5 million square kilometers. It is covered with glaciers and ice sheets. During winter, temperatures can drop to minus 50 degrees Celsius. But a new study has found that the Arctic is heating up, and that too pretty fast, almost 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Why is this happening? Similar reports in the past have hinted at a special phenomenon. It's called Arctic amplification. And here's how it works. Normally, the polar ice reflects the sun's heat. It bounces off the Arctic region. But now that the ice is melting into the sea, there is no surface to reflect the sun's heat. All that warmth is being absorbed by the water. And the result is this: faster Arctic warming. A United Nations report in 2019 has drawn similar conclusions. It found that the Arctic was warming 2 times faster. And this new study says it is 4 times faster. Either way, it's not good news. On an average, Arctic temperatures rose 0.75 degrees Celsius per decade, in some places by 1.25 degrees. That's almost 7 times faster than the rest of the world. How does this impact our planet? The immediate effect will be felt by the local communities and wildlife. The Arctic was first settled around 3000 BC. And even today, around 4 million people live in this region. They will be the first to feel the impact. Also the wildlife. Over 5,500 species of animals live in the Arctic region. Most of them thrive on ice. But as temperatures rise, these animals are losing their habitat. Polar bears, for example. At this rate, we could lose them by 2100, the end of the century. And imagine that, a world without polar bears. I'm sure you remember this picture from 2015. It shows an alarmingly skinny polar bear. The picture took the internet by storm. Politicians were tweeting about it. Activists were talking about it. But 7 years later, nothing has changed. Global warming continues to melt the Arctic. And one reason for that is the distance. We think of the Arctic as some distant fairyland, as if what happens there does not affect our lives. But that is simply not the case, and I'll give you one reason why. Have you heard about the Greenland ice sheet? It covers around 80% of Greenland's surface. Its total size is almost 1.7 million square kilometers. That ice sheet is close to its melting point. And if it starts melting, it could unload enough water to raise our sea levels by 6 meters. 6 meters. That's Hong Kong submerged, Mumbai underwater, Jakarta gone, Ho Chi Minh, Osaka, Chittagong, Tokyo, Hanoi, Kolkata, all of them gone. And these are some of the cities we stand to lose. They would be below the sea level. Put together, the world would lose almost 444,000 square kilometers of land. Today, 375 million people live there. So Arctic warming is not some far-off phenomenon. It will directly impact your life as well. And the extreme heat is not just melting the ice, it is also drying up our rivers, like the Thames in Britain. At 356 kilometers, it is the second longest river in Britain. Every summer, the source of the River Thames dries up. But this year, it is worse. The dry patches are extending further downstream. Locals say they can't remember anything like this.
It does seem very different, yeah. It's drier, a lot drier than it's been before, and it's moved, the source has obviously moved a few miles further than it normally would. It's always dry in the summer here, but we do worry about what that's going to look like in the winter now, because if it's that dry up in the summer, it might not even come back this way in the winter.
The reason is the unprecedented heat. Britain had its driest July in almost 20 years. Rainfall was just 35% of the monthly average, so put together, it was the perfect climate shock. No rain and a lot of heat. In fact, things could be getting a lot worse in Britain. The country has declared an amber heat alert. Temperatures are expected to top 37 degrees Celsius. All of this points to a climate emergency. Unlike wars and pandemics, there is no recovering from that. You can't rebuild the lost ice caps or drain the rising oceans. There is no replay or redo when it comes to climate change. The only time to act is now. And finally, we have some news coming in from New York. Indian-born author Salman Rushdie has been attacked during a lecture. Videos showed the 75-year-old collapsing to the floor. New York police say that he was stabbed, and these pictures can be disturbing, so we advise viewer discretion. His immediate condition remains unknown. After the attack, Salman Rushdie was surrounded by a group of people who were seen holding up his legs, presumably to increase the blood flow to his heart. The attacker was immediately restrained by people on the scene. Rushdie is the author of the controversial book Satanic Verses, which led to him receiving death threats from Iran. The book was banned by the regime in Tehran. Many Muslim clerics issued fatwas calling for his death. A bounty of $3 million has also been offered for anyone who kills Rushdie. And at this point, it is not clear if this attack was linked to those fatwas or the bounty. We're waiting for more details to emerge. For the moment, we'll take a look at what else is making news. It's time for Gravitas Global Headlines.
The Czech Republic, which holds the rotating EU presidency, said a blanket ban on visas for all Russian travellers could be the bloc's next sanction on Moscow. Britain's economy shrank in the second quarter as the GDP dropped 0.1% in the April to June period, sharpening recession fears. Australia's competition watchdog has said Google was ordered by the country's federal court to pay $42.7 million in penalties for misleading users on collection of their personal location data. The African Union confirms that the Ethiopian government and Tigrayan rebels have had direct engagement. This is the first official confirmation of contact between the two warring sides. The Islamabad court rejected a police request to extend Imran Khan's aide Shahbaz Gill's physical remand and send him to jail on judicial remand. Gill was booked under charges of sedition and inciting the public against the state institutions. Border officials in Panama intercepted a semi-submersible vessel with 625 kilograms of cocaine on board. 3 Colombians were arrested. Officials said the vessel was designed to navigate stealthily, almost entirely underwater, making it difficult to detect. 5 construction workers are missing following heavy rain in northern China's Shanxi province. Authorities have activated a flood emergency response and relief efforts are underway. A rare vortex of dust, generally known as a dust devil, was spotted spinning through a rural area in northeast England as another heatwave hit the country. The whirlwind was seen blowing over a field following a wildfire in Durham County. The NBA will honour the late Bill Russell by retiring his iconic number 6 jersey across the league. This is the first time ever the league has taken such a step. Russell, who died at the age of 88 last month, won the championship a record 11 times with the Boston Celtics. World number 1 Iga Swiatek's run at the Canadian Open came to an early end after she was beaten by Beatriz Haddad-Maia of Brazil in the pre-quarterfinals. This is the third straight event where the Pole has failed to reach the semi-finals. Haddad-Maia won the match 6-4, 3-6, 7-5 in 3 hours.
That'll be all for now. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching. Have a good weekend. We'll see you on Monday.